Hello, and welcome back to the Battle Frontier podcast, where we aim to help you level up in your journey as a competitive Pokemon TCG player. I'm Aaron Curry. Here with me, as always, is my co-host John Orgel, who I got to see in person this weekend for the first time in many months. And this week, we're going to talk about what happened this weekend in Atlanta at that regional championship event. But before we get to it, we're going to do a little bit of the discussion of the online discourse that followed that event. And that'll segue naturally into the time capsule deck that I want to talk about this week before we hit up those Atlanta results properly. And then we will go from Atlanta into our Blaine's Quiz Show before we close out with how we expect things to shift leaving Atlanta heading into Monterrey this weekend. So with that being said, John, I know you were up to a lot of Pokemon action this weekend, but why don't you tell me exactly what was going on with you?
Yeah. So I was really busy with deck check this weekend. And I was over deck checking. I was tasked with doing the seniors division. So it was me and another judge were pulling decks from that division, checking them as fast as possible, accurately as possible. And then, just running them back and forth. And that was what I was doing the whole weekend pretty much. Up until, I guess, Top Cut for that division. And then I did some sides for a little bit, but it was good. Busy, but yeah, my first time doing deck check, it was good. It was good to learn a lot of different kind of learn the different viewpoints of like different tournaments. Like that's what I was taking away was, would I want to do deck check from now on? Probably not, but that's okay. I think I learned how to do deck checks effectively and fast, and learned how to like work kind of on that team and learn how they perceive like the roles of the tournament. Or
Sure.
I'm trying to think of like the best way to put it, but every team plays their part to make sure a tournament is running smoothly and that tournament of integrity is upheld. And they're definitely focused on all of that as much as everybody else. That staffing is focused on their area and what they're doing. So it was good to be part of that team. I definitely felt like I learned a good bit. But yeah, I'm hopeful that I can take some of those skills I learned and have some knowledge and apply it to if I, am floor judging or in an AHJ position and I request a deck check, just exactly what that means and what that entails. And like now I learned that they don't like doing deck checks at the end of the round. They want to do it before the round starts or between games 1 and 2 primarily and all that kind of stuff. And like balancing just, ensuring the tournament's running on time with ensuring that the decks that could be problematic or caught and dealt with effectively. But
Okay.
yeah, it was also some challenging times. Day 1, especially, the first 3 rounds. Anytime you start something new, it was really challenging for me to kind of, I don't want to say check my ego, but I had a lot of experience coming into the event and I had to kind of listen to some other approaches and learn some different perspectives that I wasn't used to. And there was a penalty, I think round 2, where I had to go and do a deck check on a junior. I didn't do the deck check, but my partner did. And she found that the junior had 3 of their cards were double sleeved and the rest of the deck was single sleeved.
Oh.
So it created a marked card situation.
Sure.
This was between game 2 and 3. And so the junior lost the game because their cards were marked.
Right.
And they had to we had to go through the whole process of trying to find new sleeves because they didn't have extra sleeves. And the junior was like, crying and really disappointed that he had lost the game. And his parents weren't there. His dad was playing in the tournament.
Oh,
So it was just trying to track him down. So just that kind of stress. That was really tough. It was like, we were doing good and we were cranking out deck checks and all this stuff. And then that happens and we're just at the point where, it kind of deflates, takes the winds out of your sail a little bit, but it's kind of part of the tournament, especially juniors, like a lot of emotions, a lot of high emotions going on.
Sure. So
And
hold on real quick. You're telling me that you did not go into this event hoping you were going to catch as many cheaters as possible?
Not this time.
Yeah.
No, I think some players think that that's the case with some judges, and some judges, hopefully those judges don't stay at regionals very long. No, I think, you want to uphold tournament integrity. You want to make sure that when a player enters a tournament that they all have the same chance or same ability to win the tournament, not based on, you know, skills outside of playing the Pokemon trading card game. You want that
Right.
to be the focus
Yeah,
in every
for
aspect of
sure.
it, whether that's marked cards, slow play, um, any of that kind of stuff, rule sharking, any of that. You want to ensure that that's not a factor. So that's always the goal, and that's kind of that was still the goal for this weekend, but it was more just learning how to kind of approach it from the perspective of a deck check like judge as opposed to a floor judge. There's
Okay.
some differences and nuances that I wasn't really keen in or like clued into, so that was kind of a thing. Just like I feel like yeah, we're there to be unbiased more than like I would try to like apply my like what advantage is being gained from a player having this mark card in their deck, and if like, well, I don't feel like they're getting an advantage, but then the judge I was working was like, no, we have to be consistent with our
Sure.
rulings throughout the whole
Yeah, and
tournament. So
that makes sense.
balancing those two is kind of the challenge, right? Like we want to ensure that our penalties make sense logically, but we also want to be consistent with our penalties, that like one person's penalty for this thing is the same as another person's penalty for the same thing, and that we
Right.
can escalate and de-escalate from that, but we start off with that as the baseline, and then we have to kind of talk ourselves away from that, and work with other like AHJs and leads and all that kind of stuff, and then figure that out from there. So that was just
Okay.
kind of that whole thing, learning that. It was good. It was really helpful to kind of gain that perspective. But yeah, I think I, it was stressful for the first 3 rounds. I think I had a hard time acclimating, but then after those 3 rounds, after lunch, we kind of just started to work a little bit better as a team. The person I was working with, and yeah, we went from there, and it was pretty good. So definitely had a good experience overall. Atlanta's a cool city. Sunday night, me and some other judges went to this, I forgot the name of it, but it's like a sake kind of
Okay.
tavern, huh?
I said
Uh,
okay.
yeah, it was similar to, I think it's a common thing in Japan, but like basically you just sit down, drink sake, and then have like a bunch of bar foods. And so I ate some good food and unwinded a little bit after the event. And then yeah, I went and cubed with some people Sunday night and went to bed and woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning and drove back to Richmond for 8 hours. And it's a long drive, but it was fun. It was good. It's just yeah, kind of acclimating, recovering, I guess. It just
Sure.
takes it out of you, man. Like
Oh yeah.
I remember like driving to Philadelphia by myself when I was younger, and it just gets to the point where like halfway through the drive down on Friday, I'm just like, dude, I gotta start. I'm gonna just save up money and fly to everything. Like this is not worth 8 hours of my life. Like I am just gonna start just being a flying princess at this point. Like I don't know. I don't know. How did you feel? I know that you had a longer, not a shorter drive, but still long. And I know you were playing in a tournament. How was your weekend?
Well, before I get into that, I had two more
Mm-hmm.
questions for you.
Okay.
One, as somebody who has no idea what goes into the whole deck checking process, the question I had was how many decks per round were you guys deck checking?
That's a good question. Um, so our goal for the tournament, and it's in the tournament handbook, so I'm not like
Oh, okay.
leaking anything, but it's 10%. So you want
Oh,
10% of all
true.
the decks that are played. So you have that goal at the end of the event. We want to be able to say we've checked, how like there was 2,600, so 204, 260, 270 decks is the goal.
Wow.
We did it within our own division, so we had I think just under 400 or 350 seniors. So our goal was 35 to 40 decks. I'm pretty sure we got like 36 day one.
Okay.
So we did pretty good.
Yeah.
Our goal, so there's like two main times you can do deck checks during a round. You can do it before round,
Yeah.
and you can do it mid round. So you want to do before round. So when pairings are posted, you just kind of like look for a table as they're sitting down. It's just like as soon as they've presented their deck, to their opponent saying, all right, I'm ready to play. But before we set up, you come over and take the deck and say, all right, we're going to take your deck for deck check, and then we'll give you a time extension. And you give them whatever the time extension is from the start of the round plus 2 minutes for setup, and they're able to play from there. And then the other time you check is between games. It's called a mid-round deck check.
Yeah.
And you're doing it anytime before 25 minutes left in the round. So you want to make sure you're getting that in before, and you're looking to make sure that they don't have a time extension, and also that they haven't had a deck check already. You want to kind of optimize how much, like, you optimize your efficiency with what decks. You don't want to like pull players you've really deck checked before. Sometimes it happens, like especially if you're doing a targeted deck check, which is another thing. Sometimes a judge will say, "Oh, I noticed this player is playing a damaged sleeve or has sleeves of different colors or something like that, or a factory defect." Or so floor judges might bring that up, and they talk to their AHJ and kind of bring it up to our attention as deck check, and we go down on the floor and might pick those decks up. But that's good judging in my mind. But yeah, those are the main 2 times, and then you have targeted deck checks on top of that.
Okay. And then the other question, I know that you said you did a little bit of side event work this weekend. Did you happen to assist with the Pokemon Pocket event that was running on Sunday?
No, I saw it in the corner. Like, I was judging a standard tournament, and then next to me, like the next group of tables over was a 3-round Pocket tournament. So I did see it, but I didn't judge it. So I don't know how much I saw that. I looked over, I saw that they had like the equivalent of team sheets. So they had like the teams listed out. Do you know anything about it?
I have more information about it.
All right, go for it.
I just wasn't sure if you were involved, so maybe you could talk about it first. But they actually had 40 people sign up on Sunday. Nice. I know that there was another event on Saturday. I have no idea how many people signed up. I imagine the number was lower, given that people were likely still participating in the main event, because they did it at like 1:30 in the afternoon on Saturday. But the Sunday one had 40 people. They still only did 3 flat rounds, so that's no real winner, just people competing for prize wall tickets. But the format that they utilized was best of 3, bring 3 decks, win with 2 of them.
Oh, okay.
Or maybe it was best of 3, bring 2 decks, win with both. That I'm actually unclear of. But yes, they had their full deck list written out. Present your deck list to your opponent. It's full open deck list throughout the entire tournament.
Okay.
And I guess some of the feedback that some of the judges for that event got was that players wanted to have to reveal the Pokemon in their deck, and they were fine with that, but they wanted to keep their trainer cards a secret. One of the other stipulations, I should say, is that between your 2 separate decks, there could be no repeat Pokemon. So you're playing fully separate decks. There's no like multiple Drudagon, like stalling decks. You can't play multiple Darkrai decks. You can't do anything like that, really. So you're just trying to prevent people from just abusing, the best card.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you end up with somebody playing like Darkrai Giratina and Giratina Mewtwo as an example of just a strong, like aggro big basic deck lineup. And I think it's an interesting format to work with. I know I've been a big proponent for a long time that I think that the way that the Pokemon Pocket is going to proceed as a competitive game, or the best way that it would proceed as a competitive game, is with a similar format, something Conquest style. And all the online events already have open list anyway, so this isn't anything new to anybody that's participated in Pocket. But I think the cool thing is that they got 40 players for a side event for this game. So I think, in my mind, that's all signs are pointing towards this game is going to be competitive at some point. And it's just a matter of time.
Yeah. Is this the first time that they've had Pocket?
Apparently not.
Okay.
Maybe for regionals. Apparently there was a Pocket side event at EUIC.
Huh. Okay.
I learned about that a couple of weeks ago, and I was totally surprised that it existed. But I imagine that it's going to be a mainstay of the side event circuit for the rest of this season, and we'll just have to see. They'll probably take that data in and see if that points towards the need or the desire in the community for a full competitive circuit to exist.
I mean, I think that's enough. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. Like, how much more do you need, right? Like, you see online tournaments, the grassroots still getting 800 players a week plus. Anytime there's a new set, like, I mean, I've had people come to my league saying that they're getting back into the game because of Pocket.
Exactly.
It's a real thing, and I think it's kind of a disservice to call it a fad or call it's disingenuous. Like, it's not it's not the high level, but like it's just bias, I think, for a lot of players that are saying Pockets of Fat or Pockets Not Real TCG. It's the same kind of prejudice, I'd say, that Go experienced when it started out as a competitive thing. People are like, how do you make Go competitive, right? It's kind of like, well, the same way that you make anything competitive. Like, you find ways to encourage players to have skill expression and have um, I don't know, just that level. That I mean, I think it is a cool format. I don't know. Have you played this format before, or is this
So
the first you've
I've
ever
I've
tried
done
it?
Conquest with a couple of other card games, nothing Pokemon related. I know I did it in a couple of Hearthstone events that I participated in, and then I've also I played Legends of Runeterra for a little bit, and both in tournament or just like a friendly league format, we did Conquest format, and I think the added deck diversity, it adds a level of skill expression in that you need to choose what order to play your decks in depending on what you see your opponent is bringing to the table, and trying to hide your deck, that like your deck A is weak against their deck A, so you want to maybe you start with deck B, but then your opponent gets like the mind games of that going,
Yeah,
where they're like, well, oh no, they're going to lead with deck B, so I'm not even going to play my deck A yet because I want to save it to beat their other deck. And that's just another layer of strategy that exists outside of the gameplay element, because obviously compared to paper TCG, the gameplay is not as in depth or nuanced, even though there's a bit more than people give it credit for. But I don't know. I just wanted to gush about that for a second because I think it's really cool.
yeah. I would hope they'd figure out a way to fix the going first, going second aspect of
Yeah,
it.
unfortunately, that's
Yeah,
on the
it's baked into
developers,
the game.
right?
Yeah, so that's tough. Like, because if you go second, it's such an advantage, right? Like,
It depends. There
okay,
there are
I guess
some
setup
decks
decks
now.
versus
There are some decks now that don't mind going first versus going second.
sure.
Obviously, going second is naturally better for almost every deck. There are a few kind of more aggressive decks that don't care about it and would actually prefer to go first just because their energy costs are so low. But that's outside of the norm, I would say.
Gotcha.
But yeah, outside of that, didn't get to participate in that. I actually left pretty early on Sunday, unfortunately. So, spoiler alert, I ended up going 6-3 in the main event, but we'll get back to that in just a second. So, start on Friday. My longtime friend Santiago, came over from Orlando to my house, and then we started our drive bright and early at 8:15 in the morning on Friday, and hit some absolutely atrocious traffic on the way up.
Hmm.
Every time I had checked Google Maps, going to, because we stayed with a friend of ours named Jalen Jones in Marietta, so just like half an hour north of Atlanta. And on our way up, it was supposed to, every day I had checked before, be at a 7.5 hour drive. And that's also what it ended up being on our way home. But on the way up on Friday, it was 9 hours.
Oof.
And it was awful. We ended up having to go through some like back road nonsense, going around a couple of different stops on I-75 on the way up. But, doing that road trip with somebody else made it a lot more enjoyable than it would have been by myself. So I can totally get the angle that you're coming at from doing such a long drive by yourself. That does not sound super great to me. But
No, well, I did have a friend I rode with,
oh, okay.
so it wasn't that
Okay.
bad. But he doesn't drive, so that
Oh.
was that made it a little more
Sure,
challenging.
for sure.
But you get in a good groove, and I don't
Oh
mind
yeah.
driving too
Yeah.
much. But it was just, yeah, going down was tough. Like, for some reason, I was just really struggling to like stay focused and stay alert
Mm.
because it was raining like for a good half of the drive. And the sun was setting at the same time, so you'd have like a lot of road glare
Oh
from,
geez. That sounds
like,
bad.
yeah. So that was really, it just takes it out of you. Like, your nerves are just fried by the end of it.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
anyway, we're old men. We're just complaining about stuff.
So we get up there on Friday. We actually went to Jalen's parents' house, where a bunch of other Florida Pokemon players and some other local Georgia players came over, and we did this whole cookout on his parents' deck, which was a lot of fun. I know a lot of them started calling me chef over the weekend because I ended up grilling everything for everybody.
Nice.
So grilled some food, had some good food as a result of that, played some Pokemon, and just had an overall good time. Made a couple changes to the deck that I wanted to play. I went into the weekend wanting to play Archaludon Zoroark because I felt like it had roughly 50-50 matchups into most of the metagame, and you just could play your way out of many scenarios, including being Budew locked, being unfair stamped, being Iono to a low hand size, because Zoroark is such a strong draw engine inherently that sits on your board. It's hard to really disrupt it effectively. But the night before, I decided that I thought that Zoroark, the one vulnerability was it gets counter captured or bossed up, and then you get item locked, or you don't have, like, you get put to a low hand size and they're forcing you to find a Turo to pick it up, and that waits your supporter for turn. So I made a change to the deck. I wanted to put 2 Ends Castles into my list, and I didn't have any with me. I left all of my extra cards at home. Unfortunately, I had just brought up pre-built decks for, like, I'm going to play this list this weekend, and I decided to change those 2 cards, and unfortunately decided to do this at like 11:30 p.m. on Friday night, and only had access to 1 castle, and felt like I couldn't risk not getting the second one in time. So decided to submit a different deck. We'll talk about that deck here a little bit later when we talk about decks in the event, because had a few other people playing the same list, including Hunter Butler, another friend of ours named Mike Morton. And the overall concept, it's Goldengo with a list that was inspired by Yellow Van Kampen. So Mr. Goldengo Master himself had signed off on it, so it should have been pretty good. It would have been pretty good if the metagame had been a little bit different. So unfortunately, I hit Dragapult decks the first 3 rounds and said call for family with my gimme ghoul more than I said make it rain in all 3 rounds. I think of those and got 0-2'd in all of them. So in those 6 games, I think one of them was an actual game where I did things and actually attacked and had a back and forth with my opponent. Otherwise, I sat there with my 1 basic because I didn't start with an Arvin, didn't start with a Cypher Maniac, didn't start with a search card, and my lone gimme goal was doing call for family for other basics, and then just slowly getting my board picked apart by these Dragapult decks that got to set up full boards behind a Budew. And that wasn't super fun. So started 0-3, started totally out of contention for day 2, but decided I'm going to claw my way back through this, play the whole event out until I get a 4th loss at least, or a tie at that point. And because I still had only 3 major finishes up to that point, so still looking for any number of CP that I could get my hands on, and managed to 2-0 every other opponent I played throughout the rest of the event, and ended the event at 6-3. So finally hit the hoot decks that I needed to hit. The deck was playing 4 Klefki, which again, we'll show that in a little bit. But really just hit a string of much better matchups following those 3 opening rounds, and ended up as the worst placing 6-3 in the event. Because
yeah, your resistance is garbage. Yeah,
I was probably the only person who started from 0-3 that ended up at 6-3, because everyone else that was 0-3 probably dropped.
Yeah, probably, or at least lost another round.
Sure. So from there, ended up getting my top 5-12 points, and still in some contention for a World's Invite, as kind of like rough of a position as it looks like I am in, and as rough of some of these tournament experiences have been for me this season. Still kind of just plug my way through. Yeah. And then from there on Sunday, just made the drive back, left pretty early, stopped by to pick up the prizing from the event, as well as my welcome kit and a couple of other things, and then headed out, made it home, had much better traffic on the way back, and got to see the finals and all of Top Cut. One of us, whoever wasn't driving, had the stream pulled up on their phone, and we were just listening to it on the way back. Just still got to stay plugged into the event as it was happening live. And from the close of the event, one of the big talking points that we saw was people complaining about Budew, and people thinking that Budew is actually a candidate of a card that needs to be banned. And, I wanted to bring that up as a discussion topic on the show this week, because I think that it's an overreaction, in my opinion. Just out the gate, I think it's a total overreaction. And I think the major thing is that people were not fully prepared to play against these Budew decks going into this event. And I'll say that, as myself included, I did not play any supporter search for Pokemon. And I think that that's something that people are going to have to change. I think we'll also see things like Artisan make their way into decks that maybe didn't play it previously, to just help people find their basics, help people find their Pokemon, get them on the board, help themselves get into the game, outside of just trying to have these big explosive turns that involve a bunch of item cards, because that's going to be the way to combat this moving forward. But before we move on from that, what is your opinion on Budew, John?
I think anybody saying it needs to get banned probably just needs to take a breath, think about it. It's not. It's a strong card. No one can deny that at this point. Anybody that's played in this format or the previous Prismatic Evolutions format would say that, but I mean, it has 30 HP. It is really squishy. It's not hard to knock out in different ways. You do have to adjust your deck for it. The real challenge, I think, isn't knocking out the first Budew sometimes. It's when you knock out the first one and then your opponent goes counter catcher, bring something up, and then attack with Budew again, and then you don't have any response to that. That can be real annoying. And it can be really annoying if you're not prepared for that or don't have an easy response for that. If a Noctowl or if a Noctowl gets counter catchered up, you're stuck basically. Like, unless you draw a Turo or randomly play Surfer or something like that, you're really not moving that Noctowl out of the active. So I think we'll see some lists adjust. I think I was watching some of the top cut of the tournament this afternoon, and I saw one player playing Brock's Grit, or not Brock's Grit, but Brock's Training, I think.
Brock's Guidance.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Brock's Guidance over Jacques in his list, his Dragapult list, and I'm like, oh, that makes sense. It's a less powerful card than Jacques, but it allows you to set up more basics under item lock, which is really cool.
Sure.
So I mean, it depends on what deck you're playing, but I think you will have to find a way to account for and deal with Budew. But I don't think banning it, banning Pokemon should be a last resort. In every sense of that. The only time that I think Pokemon's made it pretty clear that the only time that they're going to ban cards is when cards prevent somebody from playing the game. So like if there's a combo where one player is able to just spam a card or use a card before their opponent wins reliably, if they can do that combo, Pokemon's saying, okay, we're not going to do that. So if you look back at the history of what cards have been banned, we've had Shiftry, or I guess Forest of Giant Plants, and then we had what else? Lysander's Trump card, which was a time where Seismitoad would abuse that with Shaman and burn through their deck and play disruption cards like Crushing Hammer repeatedly.
We had things like Lieutenant Surge get banned and expanded. Mostly things that allow kind of degenerate combos, and that's not something that Budew does.
Yep. So I think you're on the same page as me with that when it comes to that. Is Budew powerful, and were people unprepared for it? Absolutely, but I don't think that is ban worthy. If this continues for the whole format, I know that Pokemon might make a hard counter, like you could, I don't know, like Monkey Dory does a decent job of dealing with Budew if you think about it, or like maybe not necessarily as strong as some other stuff, but like we have answers. I mean, we have efficient attackers that can hit into it. Like most decks have a way to deal with it. It's more just getting into those attackers or responding to item lock. And Budew's sufficiently small enough to where I don't feel like it's like that was the disadvantage of playing against Seismitoad. It was really hard to knock out in one hit. It had 180 HP in a format where nothing hit really that hard, unless it was like Jolteok from Night March, and you got all your Night Marchers in the discard pile turn one. But I don't know. All the people. This is why I don't go on Twitter anymore. The Monday after tournaments could kind of be a little bit hyperbolic.
For sure. And I mean, in fairness, a lot of people have also pushed back and said they think the card's fine. People just need to suck it up and learn how to deal with it. And one of the best examples that I have of that, actually, and just to prove that this is not a new concept in the card game, is this deck for our time capsule this week. And this is a Curse Gar list from Worlds 2010 that was piloted by Frank Diaz. And you can see right here, the first card in the deck, the Ghastly from this line that was released in Stormfront, has Pitch Dark, which is Itchy Pollen. It just doesn't do 10 damage, which you can argue is better, is worse. It's a kind of a little bit in both baskets. The other thing is that in this format, there were definitely some workarounds for this item lock. you couldn't win a game by just saying pitch dark the whole game. Eventually, your opponent would be able to knock you out. And some of the things that make Budew a little bit more powerful in our current game are, like you said, things like counter catcher, things like unfair stamp, and just setting your opponent to a low hand size and then repeating that lock. Whereas here, you don't really have access to tools like that because they just didn't exist in the format. But the way that this deck worked was you did definitely want to prevent your opponent from playing item cards for as long as possible. And the way you would do that is just opening the game with a Ghastly. You would announce pitch dark. Your opponent couldn't play item cards on their turn. And you would then kind of take that as your opportunity to set up your board a little bit and progress over into Spiritomb. And Spiritomb was a Pokemon that was released in the Arceus set. That's Pokebody, which is the same thing as just a static, always-on ability in the modern game, is the Keystone Steel that says as long as Spiritomb is your active Pokemon, nobody can play item cards. Well, it says trainer cards, but at the time, trainers are what are now modern item cards. Also included tools, notably. And stadiums, actually. Or no, not stadiums. Stadiums. No. I'm wrong. Stadiums are separate. So if you look here at the time in the trainer section, like supporters said supporter, items said trainer, tools still also said trainer, but had a subclass of tool in the top corner here, and stadiums were listed as stadiums. So when Spiritomb is written as you can't play trainers, it simply means you cannot play items or tools. But at the same time, in this format, we had more Pokemon search that was based in supporters. And instead of drawing with your supporter cards, you would be using your supporter cards to find your Pokemon that you would use for an onboard draw engine. And so we don't fully have something like that in the current format, but that is a way that somebody could build their deck. For example, I'm going to jump a little bit all over the place here, trying to equate things to the modern game. But one of the most powerful cards ever printed is this Clay Doll from Great Encounters with its Cosmic Power, Poke Power that says, once during your turn, you may choose up to 2 cards from your hand, put them on the bottom of your deck in any order, and if you do, draw until you have 6 cards in your hand. Extremely powerful, lets you filter dead item cards out of your hand, lets you filter Pokemon that you don't actively need at that moment out of your hand, and then draw new cards to refill your hand as a result. We actually have a very similar ability that exists currently, and it is the I always say this Pokemon's name wrong. Quaquaval?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
One of those. Whichever. Quaxly's Final Evolution from the Surging Sparks set has a very similar ability. I do not know what it is called off the top of my head, but it is the same thing. You put up to 2 cards from your hand on the bottom of your deck, and then you draw till you have 5 cards. Notably weaker because it is on a stage 2, but it's something that if your deck supremely needs a draw engine, and for whatever reason something like Zoroark or Dracloak does not fit your deck very well, there are other options that you could fit slots into your deck to make it work. Something like Mamoswine could play Quaquaval as an example to try to just filter those dead item cards out of their hand while still fulfilling the requirement that Mamoswine needs a stage 2 on their bench. But in this deck, Claydol was one of your big setups from Spiritomb because Spiritomb also has a free attack called Darkness Grace that allows you to basically TM Evolution one of your bench Pokemon, and then you would put a single damage counter on your Spiritomb. So while you're maintaining this item lock on your opponent, you're also slowly setting up your board in the back and progressing your board state while hopefully shutting down your opponent from doing the same thing. So we'll set up our Claydol to help us draw into more pieces. You can evolve your Ghastlys into Haunters and then eventually into Gengars. And there's 2 different Gengars in this deck as well as a level X. So the first one is one that's probably one of the most well-known Gengars ever. This is the Gengar from Stormfront with its Fainting Spell Poke Power that says, if Gengar is knocked out by damage from your opponent's attack, you may flip a coin, and if you get heads, that Pokemon's also knocked out. So very frequently, Gengar is just trading 1 for 1. And on top of that powerful ability, Gengar also had 2 pretty powerful attacks. One of them being Shadow Room that just put 3 damage counters on 1 Pokemon for a Psychic Energy. But if that Pokemon has a Poke Power, you're putting 6 damage counters instead. So you're able to just spread damage on your opponent's board, kind of pick things off, and then when your opponent comes up and KOs your Gengar, you're also KOing potentially, on a 50% chance coin flip, whatever they hit you with. And then the other attack is Poltergeist, that for a Psychic and a Colorless, you look at your opponent's hand and do 30 damage for each trainer card you find there. Or trainer, supporter, and stadium that you find there. So all those trainers that you've prevented your opponent from playing throughout the early game are stockpiled and stuck in their hand, and now you can just blow up whatever they have in their active. The other namesake of this deck is the Curse Gengar from Arceus, and that's why this deck was called Curse Gar. So the Curse ability on this Pokemon says, once during your turn, before you attack, you may move 1 damage counter from one of your opponent's Pokemon to another of their Pokemon. And so you can take some of those Shadow Room damage counters from your other Gengar and kind of ping things around. The big things in this format, we had Uxie and Azelf, notably as big bench sitting Pokemon that helped assist in setup for decks, but they were 70 HP basics that had Poke Powers. So you could Shadow Room one for 60, Shadow Room something else for 60, and then at any time during the rest of the game, you can just ping one of those damage counters over and KO that Uxie. The other thing that this Gengar could do supremely well was use this Shadow Skip attack for a Psychic, 2 Psychics and 1 Colorless. You would do 60 damage. It also does 10 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, and then Gengar switches with one of your bench Pokemon. So you run away immediately and hide behind your Spiritomb again. And so, again, you're keeping your opponent item locked, ideally the entire game. They could never play an item card. And at some point, you would level up one of your Gengars to be Gengar level X, whose ability Level Down says once during your turn before you attack, you may choose one of your opponent's level X cards, remove that level up card from that Pokemon, and shuffle it into your opponent's deck. And this is good against things like Luxray, GL level X, Garchomp, C level X. You could shuffle a Gengar level X, although very frequently you would be getting Psychic locked, so Level Down is not very good in that matchup. But the big thing with this Gengar was the Compound Pain attack, which for 2 Psychic and a Colorless, same cost as the Curse Step from the other Gengar. Says Compound Pain does 30 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon that already has any damage counters on it. So between the Shadow Room spreads, the spreads from Curse from your other Gengar, pinging that damage off to other Pokemon, we're just getting damage counters all over the opponent's board and then spreading them around and amplifying them essentially as the game goes longer and longer and longer. And to kind of go along with this long drawn out game plan, this deck also includes a 1/1/1 Nidoqueen line with the Maternal Comfort Pokebody that says at any time between turns, you remove 1 damage counter from each of your Pokemon. And you cannot use more than 1 Maternal Comfort at a time, so that's why you would only include 1 copy of Nidoqueen in your deck. So you can sit here and do the hit and run strategy with your Gengar, and notably, Gengar level X is pretty difficult to knock out. Dark's not a super common type in this format. And so if you have this Shadow Skip Gengar that keeps hit and running to the bench, your opponent's going to have a hard time bringing it up. The only real gust options in the format were using a Luxray to Bright Look something into the active spot, or using a Garchomp to Dragon Rush and do 80 damage on the bench, which for both of those are at best a 2-hit KO on this Gengar. So if you're able to hide it away from your opponent for a couple of turns, you're sitting there and slowly removing that damage and kind of working your way back to being a fully health tank Gengar, just being a menace to your opponent.
Wasn't Reversal
and the other
in this
kind of
format?
No,
it was played in Gyarados.
Right? Oh, you're right. Reversal would be in this format. The other one, there's actually a Regice that can move your opponent's active if it's a basic as well. But the Regice is not targeted. Your opponent gets to choose what comes up, and you can't play Reversal when a Spiritomb is active.
True.
So Reversal, not very effective. So really, the only workaround is that Luxray. The other big thing here is using Dusknoir's Dark Palm, very disruptive card. I know we featured it on previous time capsule segments, but just for anyone who may not have heard those, Dark Palm says if your opponent has 4 or more bench Pokemon, you may choose one of them and shuffle it back into their deck. So just get rid of that problematic card that you don't want on your opponent's bench while you proceed to knock out basically everything else that they have in play. And to assist with your early game setup, we have the Uxie with its setup power. It lets you just draw up to 7 when you play Uxie. And we also have Azelf to help fish key Pokemon like your Curse Gengar or your Gengar Level X or one of your tech Pokemon like Nidoqueen or Dusknoir from your prize cards with its Time Walk ability. And there are also instances where lockup can actually be pretty key as well. And if your opponent is not able to do a significant amount of damage to your Azelf, you can actually just do a combo of lockup and curse to keep something infinitely or almost infinitely stuck in your opponent's active while you build damage up on their bench to then amplify with Compound Pain later. And to get around the fact that you can't play items either when you have Spiritomb active, this deck plays a lot of search supporters. So we have 2 Roseanne's Research to go find any combination of 2 basic Pokemon or basic energy cards and put them in your hand. We have 3 copies of that, along with 2 copies of Pokemon Collector that allows you to search your deck for 3 basic Pokemon and show them to your opponent, put them into your hand. So we're playing 5 supporters that search for basics. On top of that, we also have 2 copies of Bebe Search, which is take a Pokemon or take a card from your hand, put it into your deck, search your deck for a Pokemon, show it to your opponent, put it into your hand. And then to be equally disruptive, we have 3 copies of Judge. Big surprise, Judge still exists now, still does literally the same thing. And we also had Felicity's drawing to filter extra copies of Spiritomb or other unnecessary cards out of the hand and draw additional cards from the deck. To help have kind of a more explosive start with something like a Fainting Spell Gengar in matchups where it was necessary, or to get this Dust Noir line out because there is no Dusclops in the deck, there are 3 copies of Rare Candy. There are 2 copies of Pokemon Communication, which is very similar to Bebe Search, except you have to put a Pokemon from your hand into your deck to utilize it. Then we also have 2 copies of Warp Point, which is the same thing as the fairly recently rotated Escape Rope that we've had in the modern standard format, and 1 copy of Luxury Ball. That is just an item card that says search your deck for a Pokemon that is not a level X, put it into your hand. You cannot play this if you have another Luxury Ball in your discard pile. Rounding out the trainer cards from this deck, we also have a Night Maintenance, which is the same thing as Super Rod, just up to 3 Pokemon or basic energy cards shuffled back into your deck. And 2 copies of Expert Belt to help your Gengars do additional damage while also being extra tanky, with the trade-off of transforming them into a 2-prizer to do so. So again, I talked about previously how hard it is to knock out your Gengar level X when it's just at the base HP amount. When we add another 20 HP, it's basically impossible to 1-hit KO it, and actually almost impossible to 2-hit KO it if you have that Nidoqueen out. So it just makes the thing a nightmare to deal with, honestly. And then to help with their hit and run strategy with the Curse Step from that Gengar hiding behind Spiritombs, there are 2 copies of Moonlight Stadium to help give your Spiritombs free retreat as well, to bounce back and forth. You have the Psychic Energy to pay your energy cost. The other thing to help with your Spiritombs retreat are 2 copies of Warp Energy, which would essentially serve as 2 switches for a Spiritomb, because you would, on attachment, it goes back to the bench. Then when you swap back into it with Curse Step, you can then retreat it on a following turn, still fulfilling that cost. And the last thing, and one of probably the most important things to help you set up under an item lock, was Call Energy. And this is a card that I actually could see being reprinted at some point and not being too overpowered. And Call Energy simply provides 1 colorless energy while it's attached. But if it is your active Pokemon that has the energy, you can end your turn by searching your deck for 2 basic Pokemon and putting them on your bench. And that's an effect that honestly was super healthy the entire time it was legal. And maybe you could argue that it was a little overpowered in the sense that there was no other way to go search for 2 basics on turn 1. But at the same time, I think that it helped balance out something like Spiritomb or what would be Budew in a current modern standard format. So I think, if you want to try to appease the Budew haters, Call Energy might be a pretty good way to go.
I could see that.
But yeah, it's a pretty interesting deck. It's honestly a very frustrating deck to play against, but nobody likes being item locked, and this deck is really good at item locking people.
Yeah, especially, Spiritomb is probably one of the most broken cards I've ever played with in Retro.
Sure.
The Pokebody is not too impactful since your deck is built to play around it, and then you can just throw it up at the end of your turn. You don't have to have it in the active the whole time. And the Darkness Grace is probably it's one of the most powerful support attacks. Just being able to set stuff up behind this kind of it's 60 HP, but it's still a wall because your opponent can't do anything to it. I could see this card is more toxic than the Ghastly in my opinion.
Sure, absolutely. But at the same time, it was a card that any evolution deck could utilize.
Sure.
And we saw multiple evolution decks utilize this because it helped stop the kind of big basic aggro SP decks, at least somewhat, or made them stumble, I should say.
Yeah, slowed them down.
For sure.
We featured this card already in the Gardevoir Gallade deck with on a past episode of Time Capsule. But yeah, and most of the support cards in this format transfer from one deck to the other. So it's kind of cool. The framework still exists. But yeah, I know if you're a big Gengar fan, this is probably one of the closest thing Gengar ever got to being super competitive,
right?
In a lot of ways. Yeah, I don't think there's a lot. There's Gengar VMAX, I guess, at one point, but there's not been a whole lot of love for the Purple Ghost guy.
No, this era, these are probably 3 of the best Gengars ever printed, if not the best Gengars ever printed.
And they're probably still pretty expensive.
A new Gengar would have to do quite a bit to pass them up. Oh yeah, right now this deck apparently is about $500, a little bit over $500.
Yeah, and that's
But
probably mostly the
I mean,
Gengars.
some of that's hidden inside of these,
Oh, true.
gold silver energies. But outside of that, interesting deck. I would if you want to play this format, I think the best way to play 2010 is to proxy it. Totally recommend that to anybody wanting to do it. And yeah,
Yeah, and
that's
it's
going
a
to
pretty
close us out for
popular
Time
one.
Capsule.
The
Oh, for
2010s,
sure.
like if you go to a regional, most people have 2010 decks, if they're playing retro. So
Oh,
if you go ahead.
sorry, that's one other thing I forgot to call out up at the top of the show. I did run into a couple of people this weekend who told me that they listened to the podcast and had a little bit of a conversation about retro with some of them, including talking about 2010 decks. And so it was pretty cool. So just wanted to say, hey, thank you if you came up and said hi this weekend. Meant a lot. Even if I didn't have a ton of time to stop and talk to anybody, it was still a really cool interaction to have, and I look forward to seeing other people in the future.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's what I mean. Not like we do this for cloud or anything like that,
No,
obviously, but
no,
it is
but it's
fun to
nice to know
have
that
that
somebody's
interaction.
listening.
Yeah, it's nice to have genuine interaction with the community,
For sure.
especially when it's something we all like to talk about. So
Absolutely.
cool.
But yeah, that's enough about the past. I think we can now look forward to why Budew was such a menace and look at these regionals results. And the first thing I want to do is gush a little bit more about this new website that Robin Schultz has put together that is currently still listed as being in beta, I believe, but it is the Limitless Labs, or labs.limitlesstcg.com. And believe Robin is doing a lot of scraping from Arcanine, as you can see indicated here.
Mm.
But the nice thing is we can do all sorts of things with this. You can look at metagame percentages, and you can have variants grouped or ungrouped. So if you want to see raw percentages, you can see, if we just go by win, these separate Frostlass decks are grouped independently of each other. These Goldango lists are grouped independently of each other. Or we can go here and group everything, and you'll get essentially the same readout that you would see on the TCG stream if you were watching it. So looking at the overall meta percentages, this should be equivalent to day one. Dragapult, undisputed most popular deck in the room, being 18% going into day one. And then surprisingly, I know we mentioned we expected Goldango to kind of rise up, but I don't know if I expected it to jump up this high going into this event.
Yeah, not over
coming
10%. I did not think that would be the case.
No. Coming in at 14%. And then third most popular deck being Raging Bolt at 12%. And then we hit some of the Noctowl decks. So we got both Terrabox and Terrapagos Noctowl at just over 10%. And rounding out our top six was Archaludon at 7.6%. And then we go a little bit deeper and we see some of the other kind of decks that we expected to see, like Gardevoir, like your other Noctowl decks in the EV box. And if you go down even further, we see some other popular decks like Charizard, and then the owner's Pokemon that people would have looked at before you really kind of get into the fringe stuff that you don't expect a ton of people to play. But then when we go and look at day two, we see that, as is tradition, Raging Bolt fell off. I don't, fell totally off from being 12% all the way down to 7% of the metagame, with Dragapult jumping from 17% of the field to almost a full third of the field going into day two.
Yeah, that's impressive.
And some of this gets a little skewed, I'm sure, by the fact that a lot of top players were playing Dragapult.
Sure.
So you already expect them to do very well. And the same can be said for Goldango. I know a lot of very strong players were on Goldango going into this event, including people like Grant Manley and I'm blanking on names right now, but I know that there were several players that were playing Goldango that probably led to it doing equally as well. And Raging Bolt is a deck we've talked previously. You don't really see a lot of top players really flocking to play this. There were a few notable ones. I know, like Christian Fontenot played it. All Out Blitzel played the same list as him, was featured on stream this weekend. And both of them did make day two with the deck. But it's just not something that you're going to see a wide swath of top players flock to, even though it has become a little bit more versatile than it was in previous formats.
Yeah. I think the more things change, the more things stay the same when it comes to Raging Bolt.
Sure.
Like, we know what it is at this point. I mean, it did get some cool tricks, at least like with the Noctowls and such, but I don't think it's enough to really make it a meta defining deck at this point. Like, its Dragapult matchup isn't good enough for it to really kind of edge out anything else.
Sure. Before we move on to look at the final standings for the event, I did want to talk a little bit more about the website that Robin has set up here. So you can look at the individual win percentages of these decks. during day 1, day 2, or overall throughout the event. And if I go here and click on an archetype, one, you get a list of players that played the deck and their final standings, but you can also look at the deck's individual matchups throughout throughout the tournament, or you can actually filter for just their day 2 matchups. So if you're looking for tournament data and how to read into that going into an upcoming event and want to use majors data to feed that for you, it's all here. Just come click around. You will be able to find exactly what you're looking for. If you say, hey, Dragapult did really well at this event. Dragapult Dusknoir in particular did really well at this event. What did it do poorly against? Oh, it looks like it had a good number of games against straight Dragapult. Well, a small sample size. This is day 2 only. So let's take the day 2 filter off. Wow, there were 4 Okie Dokie decks, John. And they all beat the Dragapult Dusknoirs they played.
What do they know that we don't? That is impressive.
So we look at Goldango Dragapult. We've got over 50 games here, and it beat Dragapult Dusknoir almost 70% of the time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, ties get a little bit wonky with how Limitless does these calculations, but I would say Goldango Dragapult appears to have a decent Dragapult Dusknoir matchup. Separately, Gardevoir seemed to do very well against Dragapult Dusknoir with 143 games across 2 days, beating it again over 60% of the time. Pretty strong matchup. Gardevoir is a pretty difficult and kind of technical deck to play, and it's something that may not be easy to pick up, but might be worth doing so if your primary goal is to beat Dragapult moving forward. And as we progress down, we're going to see closer and closer matchups. Terrabox still seemed to edge out the Dragapult Dusknoir overall throughout the event, but just using that as an example, if you're looking for tournament data and how to kind of make an informed decision for a deck that you may want to make moving into a future event, this is definitely the place to be. But that being said, we can jump back into the total result for the regional. And Henry Chow once again has proved that he is just an absolute monster with his Gardevoir deck and took down the event over Andrew Hedrick, stopping Andrew from winning his second event of the season, with Henry claiming his third title. And the other big thing here we've got, so Henry on Gardevoir, Andrew Hedrick on Dragapult Dusknoir, Florida local Tanner Hurley on straight Dragapult, Karis Jones on straight Dragapult, Aban Ahmed making another top 8 appearance, this time with Dragapult Dusknoir, Sebastian Lashmet making another top 8 appearance with straight Dragapult, Orlando Karam getting his first top 8 of the season with Gardevoir, Keaton Gill with Terapagos Noctowl, and Bodie Robinson rounding out the asymmetrical top cut with Goldango. Then we go a little bit further down if we just want to look at top 16. We can see that the reign of Dragapult goes very deep.
Mm-hmm.
If you go all the way through top 32, I think Dragapult was, what? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 18. So over half of top 32 was Dragapult. Just very dominant deck. You can see some of the names of players that did play the deck. We've got Rowan Stabenow, Grant Manley, if you want to count this as a Dragapult deck, was playing Dragapult. Just John Ang, Fabrizio, Inga Silva, just very strong players all playing the deck. I think that it would be hard to say that Dragapult did not dominate this tournament, even though it did not end up winning the entire event.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely seems like the going forward will be considered the BDIF still. And I remember talking with somebody on the floor before the tournament or early into day 1, and they were like, "Yeah, my friend said that Dragapult was going to be a bad pick for this tournament," and I'm just like, that seems bad, like that seems like a bad take. And sure enough, I mean, we talked a little bit about what we thought would be good. We did put in our tier list Dragapult at the very top, and I think it definitely earned that spot. If anything, we could have even probably put it in the S tier for this one, looking back at it. But I think, like you touched on, we had a large number of great players playing Dragapult. I think that always boosts the numbers for a deck. But there's a reason why the great players are playing Dragapult. There's no other deck that gives you as much agency as Dragapult does, especially Dusknoir. You're able to combo really well, but the straight variants still play a lot of tools and tricks for different matchups. So we get to see, like, if you were watching the stream at all, people might have grumbled that they featured a Dragapult mirror in the first round on day one. But I think it was more to showcase like top players playing really well to introduce you to this format. And it feels like Dragapult's just the best. Like you're never really out of the game. Similar to Gardevoir in some ways, but even more so. Like you're able to have insane like 5 prize turns where you're able to just go, okay, Curse Blast, and then Dragapult knock out 5 different things. Like knock out 3 different Pokemon for 5 prizes. And there's no other deck that can do that right now. I mean, not
Nope.
even close.
No. I
Yeah.
think we can go ahead though and talk about some individual lists here. So,
Mm-hmm.
first thing, Henry won't let Gardevoir die. Has to be the champion of Gardevoir, probably the most earningest Gardevoir EX player by a Tord still might have an advantage just because of the world's finish, but
Sure.
that's a little weighted. But bringing Gardevoir into the new format, refinement is no longer with us, and Henry said, "I don't care. I'm going to bring my own refinement to the table." With this 1/2 ends Zoroark EX line. And some of the other kind of new inclusions to the deck, only one other Journey Together card, and that is the Lily's Clefairy EX, which is notably very good into Dragapult.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the big combo play that you look for and the Dragapult player needs to be on the lookout for and avoid is letting you get to a point where you have a Monkey Dory with a Dark, the ability to put Mew active with Lily's Clefairy on the bench, use Psychic Embrace 3 energies to the Mew, move 3 of those counters with Adrenabrain to a bench Dracloak, and then Genome Hacking to copy Phantom Dive to knock out the active Dragapult and knock out a bench Dracloak at the cost of what for your opponent would only be a 2-prizer. And then your opponent has to choose which of your 2-prizers to take out, and then you just do the thing again.
Yeah.
And it becomes very difficult for your opponent to come back from, especially when we see Henry including copies of Bravery Charm to make these squishy 2-prizers even that much more difficult to knock out. And then aside from that, this looks very much so like a Henry Chow Gardevoir deck. We've got the secret box in tow still. We still have copies of cards like Professor's Research, a thick Iono line. And then the interesting card is Morty's Conviction, where Henry said, I don't really want to play 4 research in my deck, but Morty still allows you to kind of filter a psychic energy into the discard pile and take advantage of particularly of some of these Terra decks that are really going wide on their bench. If they've got 5 up to 8 bench Pokemon, Morty's is drawing you 5 or all the way up to 8 cards potentially off at the cost of doing something you already want to do by either getting a dead card or specifically a psychic energy into your discard pile.
Yeah, it's cool to see Henry innovate. He's done it so many times at this point. We shouldn't be all that surprised, but this is such a cool list to me. When Gardevoir loses that refinement Curlia, you have to find new ways to get energy in the discard pile.
Yep.
And a lot of times, like watching Gardevoir post rotation in the lead up to this tournament, that was the main struggle, was just getting your energy, getting it to the discard pile. So now you have Secret Box, which can discard, but more importantly, you have the Zoroark, which can do that. And then, Morty's, like you just talked about. Like a lesser earthen vessel count because you run those things, and I think that actually works out in the end. Like you don't really want to see earthen vessel after you get the energy in the discard pile. It's just a dead card.
Sure.
So you're able to utilize and be more efficient with it. Not running Brilliant Blender or something like that. I think that's the way to go. Just focus on consistency with this. And I really like this list. It's really cool. I think those will probably be the way most people go playing Guardy moving forward. I'd have a hard time going in a different direction, but I'm sure that's the cool thing. Henry, doesn't ever rest on his laurels. He's always innovating with this deck. So it'll be cool to see what he comes up with or what other players take away from this and go for.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I will say notably, Henry did call out that apparently this is Isaiah Bradner's deck list that he worked on with him. The big other call out for this is there is 0 Arven in this deck, and that is one thing. In a Budew format, Arven is an exceptionally weak card, and we talked before rotation about how we expected Arven to be weaker with Forest Sealstone being rotated, but when you also just can't play the item card you get from the Arven, the card is basically search your deck for a tool card.
Yeah.
And that's not very good.
Agreed.
So seeing instead, 8 draw supporters and a search supporter, I wouldn't be surprised maybe even to see this Poffin become like a Brock's Guidance in the future.
Yeah, I could see that.
And just having things, you've still got basic search in the form of 2 Nest Ball, 2 Ultra Ball. You would still have 2 Poffin and 2 copies of Artisan. Streamlining the thing. The big struggle that the deck has sometimes is getting those Ralts onto the table. Notably, the other weird kind of thing here is the 1-2 Zoroark line. And just the only thought that I can have is that you have an easier time getting basics out than you do evolutions.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. We've seen something like this happen in the past. I know there have been a couple of decks from Worlds that have done similar evolution lines, and they've typically gotten flack as being inefficient. But the big thing is, if you have this, if you only had one Zoroark and it's prized, it's totally useless. Whereas with Zoroark in particular, if you evolve into one and you draw into the second one, you can trade it away. So it's really no harm, no foul at the end of the day.
That's fair.
But yeah,
Yeah.
definitely cool. And if you haven't had a chance to watch it, the finals was actually, honestly, probably one of the best series of Pokemon that I've ever seen.
Wow.
Game one was extremely interesting, and a lot of it was on the back of, I believe, Andrew Hedrick making a read on Henry's deck list and actually just getting it wrong in the end. He played a 40-minute game under Budew lock on the assumption that he would be able to deck Henry out, and was wrong about the count of supporter cards in Henry's deck that allowed him to not deck out. And not be able to lock him because Henry either had more Turo or more Iono than Andrew anticipated, and did not have any of those cards prized, notably as well. So very well played game one, and then a very exciting research into victory for Henry in game three. So definitely a very good series. Had a very, very hype ending as well. So definitely recommend going back and watching that one. But with that being said, we can go ahead and look at Andrew's deck list. And to a lot of people, this is going to kind of look like a stock Dragapult list, except, again, lower count of Arven here leads to him being more successful. We have a copy of Luxurious Cape. Some people were playing Bravery Charm this weekend. At the end of the day, the point is you want to make your Budew a thick Budew and hard to knock out. Very easy to keep it up there and let it just keep doing its thing while you build up your kind of board of inevitability in the back. And then the other notable inclusion this weekend that a lot of top placing Dragapult players had is this Blood Moon Ursaluna, which the big thing was just getting through the wall decks. You needed a way to attack into some of these wall Pokemon, notably Melodic, just because Dragapult can hit the other two no problem. And with something like Dusclops plus Ursaluna, you take out the Melodic, you're not worried about it at the end of the day. And the big thing that made Dragapult kind of really oppressive this weekend, like you said, John, was, oh, you knocked out my first Budew? Here's my second one. Oh, it's got 130 HP now. I'm going to stamp you, counter catch or something, and keep going, doing what I'm doing with my recon directives until I feel I'm in a position to where I'm going to win the game.
Right.
And that's just strong.
Yeah, it's such an effective strategy. It's really annoying for your, like, if you're the opponent that gets unfair stamped. It's so funny because I watched so many games where like the Wellspring Mask Ogerpon will just board wipe like the whole board for the Dragapult deck, like the Budew in the active, and then the Dracloak or Dreepy that's on the bench, and they don't have any other Dracloak or Dreepy in play, and all they have is like a Duskull, and you're like, oh, how the heck are they going to win this game? And then they go, okay, Arven for Buddy Poffin and what is it called? Bravery Charm or something like that. And then they go Unfair Stamp, Attach Retreat, and then Itchy Pollen. And if like the Wellspring Mask can hit Sob for a couple turns, and they can do a couple things here and there, but like it basically gives the Dragapult deck like 2, even 3 turns to where now their board presence is undeniably like so powerful.
Sure.
So I think it's not going to be going away anytime soon. It's still an effective strategy. It's really hard to play around. If you watch some of the games on stream, both players are really avoiding taking that early knockout until their boards were developed, until that, they had extra options. And then they would go in with a Dusclops and try to knock out Budew that way. And then go from there with Dragapult. Because you don't really want to use your big attacker to knock out Budew. It's so many times that if you do that, you're just kind of playing into your opponent. Your opponent's cool with you, wasting especially with a Dragapult mirror. They want you to knock out the Budew in the active because it's such an easy target on the bench. Like 30 HP, it's just sitting there. And like so often, good players will just keep that Budew around to clog up your opponent's bench because you don't really want to use Itchy Pollen too often after the first few turns unless you're in a really bad spot. But you know, most of the time you just want to keep it there because it clogs it up. Um, One thing to look at when looking at this list, you have Halucha. So we lost Radiant Alakazam. This is kind of like Radiant Alakazam at home. We don't really have the ability to manipulate damage counters on your opponent's side anymore. So we run Halucha to just kind of ping things that have 70 hit points. That way they can be knocked out with Phantom Dive. And yeah, this one doesn't run the Brox. It runs Jacques, which I think is fine. It makes more sense in an Arven deck to run Jock. But yeah, I think everything else is pretty standard. 3 Night Stretchers is a little bit more than I think we've seen, but maybe not.
No. Yeah, some of these counts are a little bit different than what people might expect. Like 3 Stretcher is 1 higher than normal, 1 candy is 1 lower than normal. But at the same time, when you're on the 2/2/1 Dusknoir, it's not as important to have that candy. It can just be nice to have at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think I like the 2/2/1 after we lose.
I've definitely been a fan of that. Like we saw, I think Natalie Millard was one of the first people to have a real breakout success with this line in particular back at EOIC. And I think that it will continue to kind of be the standard moving forward, mainly because you can't play rare candy under Budew anyway. So you might as well have a Dusclops in your deck.
Yeah, there's just times where it's just better to evolve up into the Dusclops, and getting that early Dusclops to maybe knock out your opponent's Budew is pretty nice.
Yep. Or at worst, you're protecting your Duskull from a Phantom Dive.
Sure.
So definitely impactful. But if you don't want to play Dusclops, you can come look at Tanner Hurley's list, which tackles things from a different perspective. And we can see this deck doesn't even really care about getting Dragapult out. We only play 2 of them. And instead, we're going to sit here and Itchy Pollen our opponent to death with our Bravery Charmed Budew. And every time you poke it for a little bit of damage, we're going to Monkey Dory that damage off. And again, still, set up the board of inevitability. You're just getting your Dragapult set up. You're spreading damage around with Monkey Dory to help fix your math the same way or similarly to how you would with a Dusknoir or with a Dusclops. It's less explosive, obviously, but it's a bit more controlled. It's a bit more methodical. And you can see some of that kind of controlling aspect being present in the deck in other ways too. Like a card that I expect to be extremely popular moving forward in the Genesect from Shrouded Fable with its, what is this card called? Ace Nullifier? Yeah. The Ace Nullifier ability that says if that Pokemon has a tool attached, your opponent cannot play Ace specs. And notably, Rescue Board gets rid of Genesect's retreat cost. So not only do you have a free retreat pivot Pokemon on your bench permanently until it gets knocked out, it's also shutting off Unfair Stamp, which allows you to kind of be the aggressor in that Dragapult game a lot more freely than you would be able to if your opponent had access to that Unfair Stamp.
Yeah, we were talking before the start of the podcast, and I was just saying how powerful A-Specs are, and the fact that we've seen that Genesect work before, but before it shut off the A-Specs for both players, this one is a lot better. It just shuts off for your opponent. So, I mean, you can still play your Unfair Stamp. So it's just, it's really just a almost a confounding card and how good it is. That the fact that we've let it sneak past, like not being included in a lot more decks.
Mm-hmm.
We saw it in Control a little bit, but that was really about it. But yeah, just we were talking like before the podcast. It seems right now like there's so many decks reliant upon, like their strategies are so reliant upon their A-Specs, whether it's Sparkling Crystal, Unfair Stamp, or in some other decks we have the Energy Search Pro and Golden Go. We have the
Secret Box and Gardevoir.
Secret Box.
Literally any A-Spec.
Trolley,
any A-Spec is kind of the cornerstone of its deck almost. Mm-hmm. And it really defines the strategy. They are very powerful one-of cards. And when you tell your opponent, I can play mine, but you can't play yours, it's going to swing things for sure.
Yeah.
And when we don't have access to easy tool removal, Lost Vacuum is gone. Genesect is that much harder to play around.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. When you get rid of the Dusknoir line, you have a little more room on your bench for stuff, and this is definitely an easy, bench inclusion. So
sure.
Yeah.
Other than that, nothing super crazy here. Up to 4 Arven, wouldn't be surprised again to see this decrease now that we're kind of shifting away from maybe not with the Genesect because you want to have easy access to a tool card. But I wouldn't again be surprised to see some of these go away in favor of copies of something like Jacques or Brock's Guidance just to try to help assist and set up in that Dragapult mirror in particular, or in that Gardevoir matchup.
Yeah, it's interesting to run Energy Search instead of Earthen Vessel.
Sure.
But I guess you're saying, okay, I don't really need 2 energy most of the time, and I don't really want to have to discard something. So there you go.
Yep. Next card, or next deck, I should say, is Bodie Robinson's Goldango deck. And this is a flavor of Goldango. This is definitely not the most popular. The most popular one from the weekend was probably Goldango to Dunsparce, which is probably my least favorite way to play Goldango.
Yeah.
I don't really feel like the Dunsparce brings enough to the table to warrant the inclusion in the deck. And Bodie felt largely the same and instead said, I'm going to play very few Pokemon in my deck. And the advantage of that is tons of extra deck space that allow you to be more consistent, including maintaining 4 copies of Arven, but also 4 copies of Cypher Maniac's Code Breaking, which lets you play a little bit more freely under that Budew lock. And additionally, having a copy of Iono to help try to play your way back into maybe a Goldango mirror where you start off on the wrong foot, and cards that might be considered tech cards in other matchups that could still be powerful, like Jamming Tower to help maybe with those Budew Bravery Charms, for example, or the Bravery Charms on other basic Pokemon like Screamtail or Drifloon in the Gardevoir decks, and just making things a little bit more difficult for your opponent.
There's always think it's interesting when you run Jamming Tower and TM Evo, but I guess they're just, you use them in different parts of the game.
For sure. Absolutely.
TM Evo you want to use turn 1, and then beyond that it's not very effective. So you're cool putting a stadium in there that nerfs that. I think it's cool to look at this list and see, oh, there's 2 lightning. Why is there 2 lightning? Well, I guess you don't run Levincia, but there's a world in which your opponent runs Levincia. So then you want to have, if you have to run an extra copy of any of your basic energy, then you probably might as well run an extra copy of the lightning.
Yep.
Yeah, it's kind of a cool, well thought out list. Very straightforward a lot of the time. I mean, there's a lot of one of item cards here, like the counter catcher and switch and all that stuff. Iron Bundle is really good, getting some early pressure. Golden Go, you're running the 4 EXs obviously, but then you're running the one basic one that I think it is 120 if you've evolved.
Yep, that is correct.
Yep. So it's not my favorite, if I'm honest. A lot of the times you have to like keep another Gimme Ghoul on the bench with keep it open and then Turo and put that back down onto that. I don't know. It's okay as an answer for some of the walls, but walls wasn't really that popular this weekend. I mean, we had Cornerstone in some decks, but for the most part, I mean, like we talked about, I think people were prepared for walls, and those that weren't kind of got away with not really having to worry about it too much, because
it was definitely a low played deck too.
Yeah, and there was enough hate for it that it didn't really, kill the meta or whatever. So
no, not at all. And then the last deck to talk about is one of the other decks in the full top 8, and that is Keaton Gill's Terrapagos deck. And the one big standout, obvious weird card is the 1 Lightning Energy.
Volcarona too, or not Volcarona.
Volcanion is different for sure, and has not seen a lot of widespread play. But the Lightning makes 0 sense. There's no reason to play it, and I think that this may have been a deck list error.
Okay,
but I'm not positive. Haven't heard anything one way or the other. But for the most part, this looks like, well, actually, no, I shouldn't say. This looks, up until we get to this Pidgey, this looks like a pretty standard tank Terrapagos deck. But then we go back to old school Terrapagos decks from pre-rotation, something like what we would see Tord play. We've got a 101 Pidgeot with 1 rare candy that we can search with Noctowl. And then suddenly, we aren't fully dependent on Jewel Seeker the rest of the game because we have Quick Search to assist in getting our combo pieces. And then, like you called out, John, the one other weird inclusion one could say is this Volcanion EX that serves as just kind of a damage amp for the deck, and that you can push Volcanion up, use its ability to burn your opponent's active, and then either free retreat due to Latias' Skyliner ability, or use a Jet Energy to push your Terrapagos up to the front, and use Unified Beatdown. One big thing, this notably gets around Pikachu EX's Justified Heart, I believe. Or something.
Yeah, that's right. That sounds right.
Get around Pikachu EX's ability. Also notably helps you KO Goldango with your Terrapagos. And in both of those instances, you avoid triggering Pheasandipity's ability as well.
Yeah, it's
um,
super powerful when you really break it down.
for sure.
I think it's nice to have, like, we've seen it. Some people were running like Vengeful Punch in some decks. Some were running a poison package to get around stuff like Pikachu. But yeah, this is a cool list. Definitely haven't seen any takes like this on it. So yeah, I think I'm surprised that this deck didn't really, well, not this deck, but this archetype didn't do better, considering how much. I guess it does struggle with Dragapult a little bit more than the Terra Box list, right?
It
So
can. I just think Budew in general, Budew Unfair Stamp is kind of what
true.
does a lot of these Noctowl decks in that
That's
you're
a good
not
point.
taking a knockout, so even if they get the Fez down, it's not able to draw cards. And then unless you happen to raw draw into a Noctowl, you're not getting a Jewel Seeker on a following turn. And that's
Yeah.
where you can end up in a position where you have something like a Noctowl or a Bouffalante that gets gusted up to the active and gets itchy pollened into infinity.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. Yeah. But no,
Yeah,
I don't think there's anything too crazy like I mean, other than just the couple of tech cards we've talked about.
yeah. And then the other card didn't see this deck because it is a big basic EX deck. Doesn't really take advantage of Jacques very well. Wouldn't take huge advantage of Brock's scouting either, and instead is able to leverage the Cyrano card, which had seen zero play pre-rotation. But we're going to see is something that can pop up here and there as a pretty powerful card, I think, moving forward in this format, because notably it gets your Volcanion, your Terapagos, your Pidgeot, your Blood Moon Ursaluna, your Pheasantipity, your Clefairy, just gets a wide swath of things and is actually just something where if you need to fill your bench, this can do it for you.
Hmm. Yeah, it's definitely gotten a lot. It's gotten a lot more powerful and more playable.
Sure. Yeah, that's going to round out the decks from Top Cut. The next two decks we're going to look at were ones that John and I had picked out as kind of a wild card picks coming into this weekend. And the first one from John is actually Lucas N's Conkelder deck from the senior division.
Yeah.
And we'll see Lucas here got 10th place.
So one of the perks of being a deck check judge is you get to see all the funny decks that do really well. Lucas lost his winning in to Top Cut with this deck,
Dang.
which was sick. I mean, it's a bummer, but I definitely like gave him a fist bump. Said, "Hey, cool deck, man." You know, it, it he got, I guess, some good matchups because he hit a lot of Raging Bolt there.
Yeah.
Um, so that seems like it's probably pretty
Oh,
good
that
if you're.
seems like a really good matchup.
Yeah. So he got a little lucky, perhaps. But I mean, you still got to respect the run with this kind of deck, right? So for those that aren't initiated, Conkeldurr is kind of a meme in some circles. You know, there was people joking like, "Oh, this deck's broken," but more as a joke than anything. But the main attack you're using from most for the most part is Gutsy Swing. It has a whopping fighting and 3 colorless energy cost, but it does 250 damage, and then it has the effect of the attack effect is if this Pokemon is affected by a special condition, ignore all energy in this attack's cost. So, weirdly enough, you partner this with Brute Bonnet, with the ability, what is it called? Toxic something?
Toxic Powder.
Yeah, Toxic Powder. So if Brute Bonnet has the Ancient Booster Energy Capsule attached to it, it can poison both your active and your opponent's active. So you're going to just poison that Conkeldurr and then be able to attack for free. And so what that means is you don't really need any energy to attack. You just run the jet energy to pivot a lot of the times out of the active.
Sure.
So the Conkeldurr's main attack, your main attacker, you still run one of the better attackers in the game in Blood Moon Ursaluna. But that's pretty much it. I mean, this is running a poison package with Trolley and just seeks to kind of build your deck up from there. You have plenty of time since you're running primarily non-EXs. You're running the Dunsparce engine to kind of burn through your deck that way. Um, I think this list is cool. I don't know. I don't think it'll ever like break through and be like super competitive, but like if you get lucky and hit some really good matchups, like it looks like Lucas did with the Raging Bolt, he's running some cool stuff for the Dragapult matchup. So he has the Gravity Mountain, which is a stadium that reduces the HP of all stage 2s by 30 hit points. So what that means is Conkeldurr hits for 250 and then if you attach the binding mochi, you hit for 290, and then poison brings it up to 300 between turns. So that gravity mountain will lower any of the stage 2s down to a number to which you can knock it out. So either Charizard
Yep.
or more commonly Dragapult. And the same thing goes with Blood Moon Ursaluna. You can use the same kind of combo for that. Yeah, there's the black belts training, I guess, for when you whiff Gravity Mountain. You can still use that to reach and get there. I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of the fan Rotom to get the early setup up with the Dunsparce. But yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff. I like this deck a lot. I'm definitely going to build it for my league and have it
Sure.
as just kind of a fun deck to play.
Yeah, I learned from my local store that actually ran a league challenge this weekend as well that Conkeldurr won that league challenge the
Oh,
same
that's
day.
sick.
So I
Yeah.
thought that was pretty funny. The one thing that I think that has always held this deck back is just the fact that Timber has 80 HP. So you're pretty
Oh,
much
yeah.
forced to run Precious Trolley
Sure.
to if you ever want to have a hope of getting 2 Timbers out at the same time. Because Conkeldurr is obviously a pretty powerful card, especially if you once you can get it set up. And again, no tool removal in the format makes it much more reliable to keep that thing poisoned.
Mm-hmm.
And just getting yourself favorable trades by trading a 1 prizer for a 2 prizer, or at worst, you trade 2 1 prizers for a 2 prizer. It kind of works out at the end of the day. And I'm a little surprised to not see like a Dunsparce EX in here
Yeah. I
to
guess
maybe help.
you don't really
You
need
don't
it
really need it.
because
No, you don't.
Conkeldurr doesn't have an ability, so you can.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of just another attacker. Like you've already got all these Dunsparce. Like, could you maybe do something with it? I don't know. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on this. I have
Sure.
never once said gutsy swing when I'm playing a game of Pokemon.
I'm surprised there's not more recovery. That was kind of what struck me, was you only have the
Sure.
one night stretcher. So like once your Conkeldurr do get knocked out, which granted it might be a little harder than normal to do that. You don't really have a way to get them back into the active. Like yeah, it's kind of surprising that we don't see more night stretchers or even a super rod to put some of the lines back.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a cool deck. Shout outs to Lucas for running, the only Conkeldurr I'm sure that made day 2. I don't think there was any in the Masters division. So very cool to see it almost, get to top cut.
Oh,
But
there was one, John.
oh
Oh
wow.
no, wait, that's still seniors. Hold on. I'm gonna go find this right now. Nope, no Conkeldurr, but we did have a Mamoswine
Huh? All right. Oh,
and
4
and
drop.
and 2 Slowkings. Well, no, this is 04 in day 2.
Oh man, it's fine. Okay, that's kind of funny.
Still not great,
No,
but he was there.
he was there. That's more than I can say.
Exactly, more than I could say.
Yep.
But for somebody who was there, if we move over to my wild card pick, it's literally the deck that I played. So just showing the deck was not a total meme, was not total trash. Mike Morton, a friend of mine, played the deck to a 70th place finish. And you can see Mike got a much more favorable day one than what I got, opening into 5 Hoot Hoot base decks or big basic ability based decks in a row. And that was something that this deck list was kind of designed to take advantage of. So you can see the big notable thing. We have 4 copies of Klefki in here. And the aim of that was to shut down the fan call of Rotom, or shut down Squawkabilly's Squawk and Seize, or shut down Teal Dance, and just stop your opponent with these big basic decks from having a big explosive turn into you. And instead allowed you to set up kind of this more methodical based Goldango deck. You can see we've got a 1/1/1 Pidgeot line in here. So you would do something like Buddy Poffin out a Gimmighoul and a Pidgey, attach a TM Evo, go find Pidgeotto and a Goldango, and really proceed to just ramp up from there to where you can search your deck with Pidgeot, or use like Cypher Maniac's code breaking to go find a Pidgeot, put it on top of your deck, coin bonus into that Pidgeot to go find another Goldango, and just kind of really spread yourself out to get to yourself to that kind of inevitable board state that I keep talking about. And then as a cornerstone answer, this deck also played Saraledge. And it's not the best cornerstone answer in the world, but the deck leverages enough energy to make it viable as a cornerstone answer. And the other kind of cute play you can do with this that makes it decent into mirror as well is you can actually, and this also works against Raging Bolt, you can choose to be the aggressor in those matchups, even if it means only taking a 1 prize knockout. Because then if your opponent if you take the first knockout by taking a 1-prize knockout, your opponent KOs a Goldengo. They take 2 prizes. You KO their 2-prizer. You're up to 3. They KO your Goldengo. They're at 2. You can get Cerulege set up with enough energy in the discard pile to KO something like Pheasantipity or Teal Mask Ogrepon or Mew on their bench, or Squawkabilly as an example, and then play Briar and take your last 3 prizes. And obviously that works really well in the Goldengo Mirror as well, because Goldengo is weak to fire. So the deck has game plans into a lot of the top decks. It just struggles, like I did in the first 3 games, where if you don't open with Arven, if you don't open with a search card, you're not going to set up against the Budew decks, and your Klefkis are largely useless into those matchups as well.
Sure.
So
how often did you use Briar throughout the tournament?
Not once.
Yeah, that's kind of the vibe I got, was like, oh, that's a cool card, but like just the use case is pretty narrow.
I didn't play any Goldengo Mirrors,
That's
to be
fair.
fair, and that's one of the best matchups for it. And the Raging Bolt decks that I did play against were totally shut down by Klefki, so never got to a point where it was ever relevant.
Yeah, that's fair.
The Pidgeot, though, was actually pretty dang useful throughout the event, and I set it up pretty often in rounds 4 through 9. At least one game every series, I was able to get Pidgeot online. And it's not just something that you have to rush out at the gate. Like a lot of times it was just get Pidgey on the board, and that can be enough of a threat. I had multiple people go out of their way to boss up Pidgeotto and KO it just so I didn't get Pidgeot onto the field.
Yeah.
And that's something where when you're like when you're a 2-prize deck, you don't care if your opponent takes a 1-prize knockout for the most part.
All right, so I have to ask, what was your do you like the split of Call for Family and continuous coin toss?
So the idea there was that Call for Family is obviously the weaker Gimmighoul,
right?
But it's also the only viable 1 retreat Gimmighoul, and so you wanted to give yourself an out to retreat into Klefki in games where you had to go first into decks that you would want Klefki active in. And that scenario doesn't come up super often because most of the decks that played Fan Rotom wanted to go first anyway, but that is the general idea behind it.
Okay, I got you. Makes sense. But yeah, everything else kind of logically makes sense. Yeah, I think so. You're saying that if you had to go back and play this tournament, that you might go with something more of closer to what Budew played.
If I had to go back and play this tournament, I would hopefully have the cards in place to play Zoroark Archaladon. And
interesting. Okay.
That honestly is one of my favorite decks to play in this format. And I think that it has a lot of play into a lot of things, mostly because it is a Zoroark based draw engine. And I mean, if we just go back and look at this event, like Zoroark Archaladon was not the best performing deck in the world by any means.
Right.
I have to find it first. But it actually was pretty successful in the thing. I'm boasting almost a 57% win rate across the event.
That's solid.
And notably having that same, or roughly that same win percentage into Dragapult, roughly, pretty small sample size, but decent into that, notably weak into Goldengo, and Raging Bolt in how the deck was constructed for most of these players. But one of the ways that I've thought about changing the deck post-Atlanta is including a copy of Genesect. The deck already plays a few tool cards. You're totally fine with just playing your trolley to get your Genesect onto your board, park your rescue board on it, and call it a day. And that shifts the Goldengo matchup in particular, becomes a lot more favorable once you're able to do something like that.
Yeah, if they don't have access to that Energy Search Pro, it can be really difficult because they they've edited their deck to where they're really dependent upon that because they've cut the number of Earth Vessels and Energy Search. Like, I mean, you're so reliant upon going Arven for that, and then you'll even just discard extra energies just to get them in your discard pile so you can get them later on.
Sure. But yeah, I think that's about going to close it out for Atlanta. And so before we segue into just thoughts on the metagame moving forward, we're going to jump into our Blaine's Quiz Show for the week.
All right. So, and many people, including my favorite segment of this show, Blaine's Quiz Show, we are currently at a point total to be determined by Aaron in post-production. So
nice, pretty numbers will appear up top, folks.
But just a quick refresher for those that are new to the podcast. It is a pretty simple quiz. You'll be given 3 multiple choice questions, and then I will offer 1 hint for any of those questions. And it'll just be me coming up with something on the fly. Today's category is regional champs. So the first two questions are about regional champs, and then, to be fair, I could not think of a very good third question, so potpourri for the last one.
Okay.
All right. First question. In addition to Henry Chow winning his third regional this season, this player won his third regional this season as well in the seniors division. Was it Nathan O, Polaris A, Justin T, or Omar C?
So this is gonna have to be a guess because I don't pay enough attention to seniors results, unfortunately. I do know that this is a seniors-based question, but I do not pay enough attention to seniors results.
There you go.
And so I think I've got it down to either Nathan or Polaris, but I'm not positive which one it would be. I think I'm trying to think of if I can remember how many of these segments where Chip goes and interviews the winners of these regionals. Now I know Omar is one of your locals and has made several top eights this season, but I don't think he's actually managed to win a regional yet this season.
Not a regional. He did win a special event.
Yeah.
So I'll eliminate that one for you.
I'm going to go with Nathan Osterkatz here.
Okay, Nathan, and you are incorrect. It was Justin T, Justin Templer.
So Nathan has won at least one regional, though.
I think has won. Yes, he's won one. Let me look real quick. Let's go, Nathan. All right, let me go to. I'm unprepared, but I'm gonna have to look it up later, maybe.
You're fine.
But yeah, Nathan, I think, has won one at the very least. Yeah, keep going. All right, next question. Okay. Which player has the most limitless points from regionals without any wins? So they've got the most points from finishes at regionals without winning a single regionals. Is it Grant Manley, Alex Schmansky, Gustavo Wada, or Rahul Reddy?
So is this most limitless points total or only limitless points from regionals?
Only from regionals. This is what I filtered it by regionals, and I looked at whether they had won a regionals or not. Actually, it might be total. It's a good question. I'm trying to remember how I did it. I think it's total.
So I've got this one down to a 50-50 as well. Again, it's either Grant Manley or Rahul, and I'm pretty sure I just saw these rankings fairly recently, and I, for the life of me, cannot remember. I know that the big joke, or those are two names. They're not jokes, but the two names of players who are at the top of those limitless leaderboards who haven't yet won any events. But now that I'm thinking about it, if you think about only if they haven't won a regional, that kind of does bring Alex and Gustavo back into the running, because I don't think Alex has a regional win. I know he's got an IC win, but I think he's been Mr. Second Place at regionals, and that's a tough one. But I do still think that he's below the level of where Rahul and Grant are, and Rahul's been kind of on a tear this season in particular. He is, I believe, second place on the CP leaderboard just from playing in so many events. And I know Grant has played fewer events than Rahul the last couple of seasons. So, I'm going to say Grant Manley for this.
Okay. And you are incorrect.
Oh my gosh. I flipped both of my coins. Oh no, I was just totally wrong on the first question.
Yeah, you were wrong on the first one, and then Rahul is, I think, second or third, I think third, on limitless points, behind probably Tord and somebody else. I'm woefully ignorant of exactly all of the rankings, but he's up there pretty high. And yeah, definitely. This is one of those questions, like, if you looked at the table, it would be a lot easier because Grant's lower, and then Alex and Gustavo are lower than Grant.
Sure.
but yeah, like you said, Alex has won an IC and Gustavo's won 2 ICs, so like that definitely weighs their advantages. But none of these players have won a regional, so that's kind of I thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
For how prestigious they all are. Would I trade places with them as players? Heck yeah. I mean, maybe not Grant because he's I love Grant, but he's the most salty player I've met in a while. Like when he I love it. I just love it because like what was it, day 2? We were just hanging and Grant was sitting there and I'm like, Grant, I'd love to hear your bad beat stories because he just does such a great job of telling them. Just like, and he does genuinely have some of the worst luck out of any players I've ever met. So it's always if it wasn't so tragic, it would be comical. You know what I mean? But
sure.
we 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 do love all of these players, and I love Grant. But it would be funny to. I hope he gets his regional win soon. I hope they all do. Truthfully, Rahul's long overdue. Or Rahul's long overdue. All right. Last question, and this is just kind of not a throwaway, but I just pulled a question from the question bank that I had from Xander. So here you go. Which of the following is not a characteristic that one of the Lake Trio, Yuxi, Azel from Esprit, represents? Is it knowledge, wisdom, willpower, or emotion?
John, roll that hint.
Okay. It is not. Um, the correct answer to this question has the letter D in it.
Well, crud. Okay. So I knew emotion was one of them. I did know that. I was actually leaning toward willpower previously, so I guess willpower is no longer on the table. I mean, knowledge and wisdom are kind of the same thing. So we'll say wisdom feels more of like a sage thing that they would assign to one of these Pokemon. I'm going to say that your question is null and void though because Azelf is spelled wrong. But we'll
Oh
go.
my goodness, he's
We'll
fishing
go.
so hard.
We'll go with knowledge as the
All
answer that
right.
I'm going to lock in.
And in the rare case, Aaron got all the questions wrong
Holy
this
cow!
week.
Holy cow!
I may not be able to spell, but unfortunately, you are not able to get Blaine's quiz show correct this week. So
Yeah.
we're
Wow.
on the same level. But hey, you did your best, and I'm sure I will do pitifully poor the next time we do a Blaine's quiz show. But yeah, I thought that was I'm glad I was able to come up with some good hard questions, and I offer my condolences while hiding my glee once again this week. So
Hey, I was bound to happen
it was
eventually.
bound to happen eventually, and yeah, that was this week. So yeah, that was this week's Blaine's quiz show. Better luck next time, Aaron.
That's all
And
good. I'll get you back
hopefully,
next
yeah, you
week.
will definitely get me back next week. I'm picturing some questions about Unite and about, you know,
No,
Wizards of
no,
the
no.
Coast
We
era
typically, I was gonna say, we try to
supporters.
keep it for the most part. We try to keep it TCG based or TCG adjacent enough that you can reasonably know the answer to the question. I know we've asked a couple of questions about like random video game things, like what type of food does Arvin feed Pokemon or something like that was one of the
Sure.
early questions. But um, yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. We'll get there. So yeah, so the next thing to talk about here is going to be the Monterrey Regionals this weekend, and players don't have a ton of time to adjust. There's only 1 week between Atlanta and Monterrey, obviously, and the kind of best way that we think that we can approach this is looking at what's hot and what's not heading from Atlanta into Monterrey. And so, the way that this has worked previously, John and I are going to take turns saying something that we think is a hot commodity, whether that is a deck archetype or just a trend in card usage heading into this event. And additionally, we want to pair that up with something that we think is ice cold going into this weekend. And then following that, we'll just do a couple of predictions to round things out before we leave you for this week. And so to lead things off, I'm going to say the hot commodity heading into this weekend is, in fact, Budew. Not really surprising. It's kind of low hanging fruit there. We saw Budew in almost every single deck in the top 8 of this last weekend's event. And I really don't see that changing given how successful those decks were. If anything, I expect Budew stocks to rise up. We may even see people increase the number of Budews that they have in their deck list. And I think we also can expect the metagame percentages of both Gardevoir and Dragapult to probably increase at least slightly going into this weekend.
That's a fair prediction. My prediction for hot this week going into Mexico is unfair stamp. So there was a question maybe at the beginning of this meta. I heard the casters talking about it. Sparkling Crystal versus Unfair Stamp, which is the better aspect to play in Dragapult. And this weekend pretty much cemented that if you're not playing Unfair Stamp, you need to find a way to start playing Unfair Stamp. It just swings a lot of matchups, and it's really hard to play against. It's kind of like that Chinese finger trap. The player that punches first without being set up generally is going to have a really hard time if their opponent is able to respond with Unfair Stamp and then item lock or counter catcher, any of those things we talked about earlier in the podcast. But Unfair Stamp, I think it's allowing for a lot of good comebacks. It's pretty healthy. It might be annoying to play against, but I think, just like people are saying, oh, we need to ban Budew, maybe they feel salty about Unfair Stamp. But in my opinion, you can play around it. You don't have to take knockouts. You don't have to. I mean, yeah, I guess you do technically.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, you can set up your board before taking knockouts. You can say, okay, I'm going to, build up a Dusknoir and build up a Dragapult and another Dragapult before I start taking knockouts. And then you go from there. So that's my kind of hot commodity going into Monterrey.
Sure. And so for cold, on the cold side of things, I think an ice cold card or a card that is at least cooling off going into this weekend is Arven. And I expect we will see a trend this weekend of people moving away from quad Arven in their decks. Arven is still obviously a powerful card. There are times, especially for decks that need to utilize things like TM Evo, where Arven is kind of a necessary evil. And being able to find a Buddy Puffin when you're going second is obviously a very strong ability. It's something you can set up. But you do have alternatives to that now. And they are cards that are equally as powerful when Budew has been used against you as when it has not been used against you. And so I expect that this kind of it pairs up with a hot take as well, to where I think that we'll see increased counts of Brock's Guidance, Jacques, some combination of Brock's Guidance, Jacques, and Cyrano in place of copies of Arven in people's decks.
That's fair. Yeah, that's a good take, and it's a good read. I think my cold card coming into Mexico this week is Owner's Pokemon. There's a lot of hype surrounding them, and there's some, like Henry ran and Zoroark, but he didn't run it for the attack. He ran it for the ability. So
yeah,
the Hops deck and Ends deck saw some love going into Atlanta. I know some of our locals were playing them, and they didn't really do well at all. Like, we saw maybe one or two Ends decks in day two out of all the plays. Like, Hops deck, I think, was in the top. It might have been the best at rest, but it was like 2%, like a solid 2%. And it fell off the face of the earth. Like, it didn't do anything. So it's going to be really hard for those decks to move forward. And I think we kind of knew that a little bit. I think everybody likes playing new cards when they come out, rightfully so. But this weekend just shows the power level of the established archetypes pre-rotation are just too high to really counter right now. That'll change with Owner's Pokemon when we get the Rocket set, but we're quite a ways away from that, truthfully.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Did you have any other hot or cold cards before we get into our predictions, John?
One more cold card. I know, funnily enough, I remember clearly you had a higher opinion of a certain deck going into Atlanta. And I think the deck that is probably the coldest coming out of Atlanta might be Raging Bolt. If I remember correctly, you were touting it's less linear than it was before.
For sure.
And I agree with that, but it's still pretty linear, when it comes down to it. And I'm not trying to trash it too much because I know that a lot of players are picking it up for that fact that it is linear, that does have a high power level when you do operate well. But it is pretty cold. Like we saw the meta percentage from day 1 to day 2 fall off really, really hard, and I think that is largely contributed to them, like the players playing it. But you got to give the credit. You got to give the deck some of the blame, right? So that's kind of one of
Yeah,
my cold techs coming
I
out of
think it's
Atlanta.
interesting because even though Robin does have lists that you can break out by archetype on Limitless now in that lab section, there still is a pretty clear delineation in ideology or philosophy with Raging Bolt, where you've got people that are still trying to brute force the I'm only playing the big basic EX guys, just trying to Bellowing Thunder and KO everything, starting on turn 1, going second. I'm going to Squawk and Seize into my guys and just Teal Dance, Sada, blah, 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 blah. And then in the other camp, you have the players like Christian Fontenot and All Out Blitzel playing a slower, more methodical, owl based, baby Raging Bolt based. I'm going to pick off things on your bench. I can play under Budew a little bit better than the big basic Raging Bolt. Not saying the deck's broken by any means,
Right.
but I think that if we see a shift towards that slightly more complicated, slightly more independent or flexible Raging Bolt deck, it'll actually have a little bit more success moving forward. Not a lot, but a little.
I can see that. That's fair to say. But we'll cover that for sure if that does happen. And these takes are just our opinions, really, really quick. We really hadn't done a lot of research or put a lot of thought into it other than just top of mind stuff.
Sure.
So we're likely to be completely wrong. Raging Bull could win next weekend, and I'd probably have.
We would still say the deck is probably not very good. We are constantly on Raging Bolt watch, and the one time that I attempted to give it credit, it proved to me that it's still not supremely great. Yeah. So sometimes a horse is a horse, right?
Yep.
Last thing before we get into our predictions, I do have one more hot card, and I mentioned this already. I think that Genesect is something to be on the lookout for this weekend. If you are not playing it and your deck reasonably can run it, try it out and see how it feels for you. It is obviously very, very good against Goldengo, can largely shut their deck down more or less. It is also extremely good into Unfair Stamp. It makes it easier for you to take that Budew KO without fear as much of retaliation from your Dragapult opponent. So definitely give Genesect a chance if your deck already is running tool cards. I do not think you'll be disappointed.
Yeah, makes sense.
So yeah, that'll round out for hot and cold for us here. And then the last thing, we're going to do a couple of quick predictions. So easiest one is an over-under on asymmetrical top cut. How many Budews do you think will be in top cut? And so the number that we're going to set this at, if we'll say we had 8 decks that had Budew in their deck this past weekend, a large majority of them had 2 in there. So let's say over-under 15 and a half. Actually, no, sorry. That's too high. That's too easy to take the under on. I'm going to say over under 11 and a half.
Okay, that's more reasonable. My thought would be like 10. So I'll take the under, but just barely. Like it'll still be pretty high, but I could see a world where our Chaladons and Terrapagos and all that kind of like more of the Terra Box style decks get in, and those don't really run Budew.
Okay.
So yeah, I think I'll take the under, but it could be. I'll let you figure out. What do you think? Over under?
I'm going to say over. I think people haven't had enough time to adjust. I think we're going to see the Dragapult sweep come through again. And I think we will also see at least one deck that has 3 Budews in it.
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple in play, like the Frostlass decks. Those are pretty. That's probably the biggest one I could think of off the top of my head. That runs 3 Budews or 4 even. But yeah. Okay. Do you want me to make an over under?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So over or under non-Mexican players in Top Cut. Assuming an ASIM of 9 or 10, let's go with over or under 4.
I'm going to go with over pretty 4. Easily. Okay. I think, unfortunately, if we use Merida as a reference, I think a lot of the Mexican player base is unfamiliar with like hardcore competitive Pokemon play, and therefore is probably unprepared for this regional. We didn't see a ton of Mexican players come over to Atlanta, and so I expect as addition, like kind of playing off of that, they also are going to be less experienced in this format, having experience rotation, new cards coming in. They don't have as much experience as the players that are likely to travel there from the US and Canada. And I think that we're going to see, my guess would be out of 9 players, we'll see 7, maybe even 8 that are from US and Canada.
Wow. Yeah, I don't think it'll be that drastic. There's still some good Mexican
For sure.
players, and we see them, come up to the U.S. plenty of times. But I do think it'll probably be like 5 or 6 that are outside of Mexico that make cut. We'll probably have like 3 or 4 from Mexico make cut. So I'll take the over, but I will be a little bit less, a little less excited to proclaim it for non-Mexican players.
Nah, we're getting that U.S. victory, baby.
Man.
We're taking another automatic invite because Aaron Curry needs it to get into the world's race.
I guess so. Well, I'm cheering for that.
Last prediction we're going to do here, though. And this is not an over-under. This is just a stake your claim, make your call. Which A-Spec is winning this tourney?
So we
saw Secret Box won this event. There was a lot of unfair stamping cut, though. And an Energy Search Pro made it in there, too. So which A-Spec, John, do you think is going to win this event?
I'll be boring and choose unfair stamp. I'm really hype on the card. We just had the whole segment where we were talking about hot cards. That's definitely the hot card coming out of Atlanta in my mind. So I'm going to go with that kind of. It's in so many decks right now. Well, primarily Dragapult, but like that's a pretty big deck to be in. So
yeah.
I'm going to write all these down.
Yeah, go for it. I really want to. I want to say Sparkling Crystal because I want to say somebody's going to come out of the woodwork with some kind of off the wall Terra box list that is somehow able to stand up to the Dragapult decks. But we didn't really talk about this. The reason that Terra box wasn't super successful this weekend is because when it was successful in Japan, all of the Dragapult decks were playing Sparkling Crystal as their A-Spec, which meant that they were easier to take advantage of. And now that everyone has shifted to using Unfair Stamp as their Dragapult A-Spec, the Terra Box decks are much more vulnerable to being disrupted and put on the back foot when they shuffle all of their energies away and they don't have much of a board to stand on early in the game. It's kind of the same problem that Lugia would have when it attempted to use Torrential Pump as its attack of choice early in the game. So, yeah, with that in mind, I probably can't go with that Sparkling Crystal. So I guess my question would be, is Henry Chow going to Mexico?
I probably don't. I don't think he travels too much like that. Yeah,
I don't think he does either. So but I do want to pick a different card than you. So I will go with. I'll still go with Sparkling Crystal. Okay. I'm going to say it's going to be. Even though we did see the best placing EV deck playing Unfair Stamp, I'll say we get an EV deck in there just as a guess. With a Sparkling Crystal, we get some Sylveon action, some Angel Light shuffling in all those Dragapult pieces and shutting all of those Dragapult decks down. Because Angel Light does not really care about Budew all that much. Okay, so that's going to close out our episode for this week, though. And just as a side note, since I'm going to probably cut it out in editing, John did change the line on the over-under for the number of Mexican players in Top Cut to 6.5, just so we could have a little bit of variety and we would actually have separate answers we could pick on either side of that bracket. But with that being said, I think that we have babbled on long enough this week. There was a lot to talk about, though. And I think that, at the end of the day, we will be back next week and we will let you know how those predictions went with Monterrey. And, neither of us are going to be in attendance, unfortunately, but we'll be excitedly looking forward to those results as we head further into this journey together format. So thank you again for listening and or watching. I guess last shout out, we are over on YouTube now. And I'll have a link to that channel in the description of this episode if you are on Spotify. But you can definitely just search Battle Frontier Podcast over there. And we would love to have you subscribe to the channel if you're more inclined to be over there rather than on Spotify. So thank you for listening, and we will catch you all next week.
See you.